Short blip. Okay, when we last met, we were talking about the sacrifice of Isaac. Abraham and Isaac go up to the mountain. God tells Abraham to sacrifice his beloved son. And then at the moment when the blade is about to go into Isaac, the angel of the Lord comes and tells him to stop. So Isaac survives that close call. And then they return down the mountain, and Isaac is still the child of the promise. Then if the final thing we discussed was the death of Sarah and her burial, and Abraham receiving the field in which he will bury Sarah and all his descendants as well. So we're going to pick up right from there into which was Genesis, that we finished with Genesis 23. Right now we'll go into Genesis 24. So let's pick up from there. All right, so in chapter 24, I'll read here. Abraham was now very old, and the Lord had blessed him in every way. He said to the senior servant in his household, the one in charge of all that he had, "Put your hand under my thigh. I want you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and of earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I am living, but will go into my country and my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac." So the first note here that I'll include is that, so Abraham tells his servant, "Put your hand under my thigh," which is kind of weird. But what that is a sign of intimacy. It's a sign of trust. And it was in ancient Jewish culture, it was a means of making an agreement or a pact with one another. So Abraham is asking his servant to enter into this pact with him, that the servant will bring a wife for his son Isaac, not from the Canaanites, not from the people outside of his family, but from one of his own kinsmen, one of his own people. And this is interesting too, because this actually becomes part of the Mosaic law later on. In the law of Moses, one of the laws will be that the Israelites should not marry outside of their tribes, that they should certainly never take, a Perizzite or a Canaanite or a Philistine wife or husband, to give their daughters, in other words, to a Gentile tribe, a Gentile nation. But they will not keep this law very well. It's something that they'll break continuously in the Old Testament. So Abraham does not want any intermarriage. He wants to keep the bloodlines pure, so to speak. And he doesn't want Isaac to leave the land that they're living in. He doesn't want him to go back to the land of his fathers, because God called him out of that land. There's no need for Abraham or his family to go back there, because God told Abraham, this is not the land that you will receive. This other land that you're dwelling in, or that you see, will be where you'll live and where your family will live. So that land where the alternative is to go back to the household or the land where Abraham comes from is not really an option in Abraham's eyes, because it's not what God has promised to him. So in verse 3 here, we see, I will make you swear. Oh no, we already read that part. Excuse me, sorry. Verse 5, and the servant said to him, "Perhaps the woman will not be willing to follow me to this land. Must I take your son back to the land from which you came?" But Abraham said to him, "Beware that you do not take my son back there. The Lord God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my family, and who spoke to me and swore to me, saying, to your descendants I give this land, he will send his angel before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there." So that's what we were just talking about, how Abraham doesn't want Isaac to leave and go back to where his family had originally come from. "And if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be released from this oath. Only do not take my son back there." So it's better for the servant to come back not having retrieved a wife for Isaac than it is for them to take Isaac into the old country, so to speak. Abraham doesn't want. That's the worst case scenario, is for Isaac to leave and go back there. So the servant put his hand under the thigh of Abraham, his master, and swore to him concerning this matter. So that confirms the oath that's between them now. There's an agreement, there's a covenant between the two of them. So now the servant is going to go and try to make it happen. So in verse 10, the servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, for all his master's goods were in his hand. And he rose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Naor. And he made his camels kneel down outside the city by a well of water at evening time, the time when women go out to draw water. So this would have been customary for the evening time. You know, it's a little bit cooler, the sun is going down, for the women of the households to leave their homes and to go and fill their water vessels for the many things that they would have been used water for, whether it's washing clothes, cleaning, irrigating, you know, if they had plants or a garden or something like that, or obviously drinking water. They would have gone and fetched the water, so to speak, at this time. So it's a good time, if you're looking for a wife for your master's son, it's a good time to go and be at the well, because that's when all the women of the town are going to probably be coming out and drawing water. So in verse 12, the servant here prays to God, and he says, O Lord God of my master Abraham, please give me success this day and show kindness to my master Abraham. Behold, here I stand by the well of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Now let it be that the young woman to whom I say, please let down your pitcher that I may drink, and she says, drink, and I will also give your camels a drink. Let her be the one you have appointed for your servant Isaac. And by this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master. So he makes a prayer to God to give him success, because, of course, everything good comes from God and requires his guiding hand. And, you know, it couldn't have possibly imagined being successful without the help of God. But also, he kind of establishes what the sign's going to be, you know, with God. In his prayer, he says, okay, when I ask a woman to give me some water, she's going to offer me water and also for my camels. And that's how I know, God, that you will have blessed my mission and sent this woman for me to bring for my master's son, Isaac. It's interesting because the woman at the well motif is something that appears a couple of times in the scriptures. You know, Jacob, who we'll read about later in Genesis, we'll read about his birth and his early years today. Jacob meets his wife Rachel at a well, similar circumstances. Moses meets his wife Zipporah at a well. Here you have Abraham's servant, and you have Rebekah meeting at a well. And then, so you have this common theme of people finding their future wives at the well. Wells, of course, are a source of life. So it makes sense then that the union would be kind of discovered at the well. But it's interesting because in the New Testament, in the life of Jesus, we also see a passage where Jesus meets a woman at a well too, in which, of course, is the Samaritan woman. And of course, they don't get married. That's not the purpose of that. But Christ also offers kind of a mystical marriage, right? Like in that scripture passage of the Samaritan woman, if you have a chance, go and read it. Like, marriage is a major theme. Christ asks the woman, bring your husband. She says, I have no husband. And Christ tells her, yes, you're right. You don't have a husband because you've had 5 husbands, and the one that you're with now is not yours. Marriage is an important theme there. And in that passage, her revelation, Christ revealing himself to her as Messiah, she forsakes all of that, and she dedicates her life to Christ, and she's a saint of our church. So Christ fulfills this motif of the woman at the well in a new way, where he calls his disciple, here in this case, the Samaritan woman, Saint Potini, to himself, meeting her at a well. So that's another interesting connection to this passage too. Another interesting point on this passage too is that, you know, what is the defining characteristic of this woman's worthiness, right? In the prayer of this servant, of Abraham's servant, what's the sign? What's the characteristic of this person to know that she's the one? It's her care for strangers. It's her hospitality. And we talked about how important that was, especially in the story of Abraham, the hospitality of Abraham, and also in the story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, how the people of the town did not treat their visitors and strangers in the city very well at all. So that's kind of what the defining sign is going to be, is her hospitality, her friendliness to strangers and caring for them. So now let's see what's going to happen. In verse 15, we read, "And it happened before he had finished speaking that, behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother," so in other words, she's in the family, "came out," which is what Abraham wanted, "came out with her pitcher on her shoulder. Now the young woman was very beautiful to behold, a virgin, no man had known her. And she went down to the well, filled her pitcher, and came up. And the servant ran to meet her and said, please let me drink a little water from your pitcher. So she said, drink, my lord. Then she quickly let her pitcher down to her hand and gave him a drink. And when she had finished giving him a drink, she said, I will draw water for your camels also, until they have finished drinking. So the servant gets the sign, right? That was the sign. Rebekah comes and she does exactly what this man was anticipating and praying to God, as the sign of the appropriate wife for Isaac. So in verse 20, she quickly emptied her pitcher into the trough, ran back to the well to draw water, and drew for all his camels. And the man, wondering at her, remained silent, so as to know whether the Lord had made his journey prosperous or not. So it was, when the camels had finished drinking, that the man took a golden nose ring weighing 1/2 shekel, and 2 bracelets for her wrists weighing 10 shekels of gold, and said, whose daughter are you? Tell me, please, is there room in your father's house for us to lodge? So she said to him, I am the daughter of Bethuel, Milcah's son, whom she bore to Nahor. Moreover, she said to him, we have both straw and feed enough and room to lodge. So remember, the servant doesn't know at this point that she's part of Abraham's family, which is one of the criteria for Isaac's wife. But we know that already. So he's trying to find out, whose family she's from. And so she tells him that she's, Milcah, and who's married to Nahor, who's Abraham's kinsman. So now that's kind of like seals the deal for the servant. And in verse 26, we read, the man bowed his head and worshiped the Lord. And he said, blessed be the Lord God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his mercy and his truth toward my master. As for me, being on the way, the Lord led me to the house of my master's brethren. So the young woman ran and told her mother's household these things. So she goes now to prepare the house for him to stay with all his camels. And the first thing the servant does when he realizes that Rebekah is the one, he gives praise to God. So in the beginning, he prays to God for his help and his guidance and his providence. And then in the end, he praises God for completing the mission. Although at this point, the mission is not complete, at least for bringing him to the woman that's, intended for Isaac. Now in verse 29, Rebekah goes to her brother Laban, and Laban comes out to meet the servant after Rebekah tells him what had happened. So in verse 32, the servant comes to the house of Laban, and he unloaded his camels and provided straw and feed for the camels, and water to wash his feet and the feet of the men who were with him. So in other words, they show good hospitality, which again would be very important at that time. Food was set before him to eat, but he said, I will not eat until I have told you about my errand. And Laban says, speak on. And so here, Abraham's servant explains pretty much everything that has happened up to this point, that Abraham has sent him to find someone from his household to, and that he prayed to God for the sign, and then Rebekah, fulfilled all the sign. This is verses 34 all the way to, let's see here. all the way really through verse 47, 48. So he kind of repeats the story. He tells Laban basically what has happened, and he repeats that story to him to show why he's here, basically. So in verse 49, we see the servant say, "Now, if you will deal kindly and truly with my master, tell me." Meaning, if you will give Rebekah to us as a wife for Isaac, tell me. And if not, tell me, that I may turn to the right hand or to the left. Basically, he wants to get an answer from her family about whether she can come, whether they'll give her in marriage to Isaac or not, so that he knows what he has to do, whether he has to leave or whether he's going to go home empty-handed or whether he's going to leave, having fulfilled his mission. So in verse 50, then Laban and Bethuel answered and said, "The thing comes from the Lord. We cannot speak to you either bad or good. Here is Rebekah before you. Take her and go, and let her be your master's son's wife, as the Lord has spoken." So the family of Rebekah, really recognizes the will and providence of God in this whole scenario. And they basically say, well, this is what God wants, clearly. He gave all the signs. She fits every criteria. And you prayed to God, and this is what he brought to you. So that what can we do? Well, how can we stand in the way of that? And so they respect that. They respect the will of God in this case, and they allow her to go and to be married to Isaac. Now the servant stays with them that night, and then in the morning they're ready to go. Laban, her brother, wants her to keep staying for us for 10 more days, but in the end Rebekah says, "I'll go right now." So then they go home, or they go towards Abraham's house. They see Isaac in the field. I'm just paraphrasing here these verses, the end of the chapter 24. As they're coming back on all these camels, Isaac sees the camels coming, and he sees Rebekah. Rebekah sees him, and they go and they meet one another in the field, and Isaac takes her, and she becomes his wife. So in the end of the chapter here, Isaac and Rebekah are married. So in the end, it's a successful journey for the servant. He fulfills Abraham's wishes, and Isaac and Rebekah are married. And in the last verse, it says Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. So the implication there is that it was very difficult for Isaac to lose Sarah. So now being married to Rebekah has comforted him during his time of sorrow. So with that, we move to chapter 25. The beginning of chapter 25 kind of recounts Abraham's family life after this episode, after Sarah has died and after Isaac has found a wife. Abraham marries again, and he has more children, actually. Remember, in ancient times, the more children, the better. Sign of God's blessing. You can keep your household going. You have workers for your herds and your crops and things like that. So Abraham, even in his old age, has more children, and with his second wife, who's Keturah. But when the time comes to give the inheritance, he gives everything that he has to Isaac, because Isaac, again, is the son of the promise. And we'll talk a little bit more about the birthright and inheritance practices as we get to the story of Isaac and Jacob and Esau, Jacob's brother. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along here. So in verse 7, we read about the death of Abraham. He lived to 175 years old. And in verse 8, we read, Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man full of years, and was gathered to his people. And his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, which is before Mamre, in the field of Ephron, and the son of Zohar the Hittite, the field which Abraham purchased from the sons of Heth. There Abraham was buried, and Sarah his wife. So Abraham is buried next to Sarah. So they're buried together. So even though Abraham married again and had more children, he's buried next to Sarah, who was his wife for 100 years, right? And they went through so many things together. So he's buried next to her. She's the one that he loves. Now, we have a genealogy after that. We have a genealogy of Ishmael and Isaac, which sorry, from verses 12 to verses 18, we have the genealogy of Ishmael. I'm not going to go over that with you. If you want to read about Ishmael's family and how successful and prosperous they were, you can kind of read through that. God had promised. What it shows is that God fulfills His promise, right? God promised to Abraham that He would take care of Ishmael too, and He does that, right? And Ishmael's children and genealogy are very successful and prosperous as well. In verse 20, now we get to hear about Isaac and his family. So the patriarchy of the nation of Israel has been passed down from Abraham now to Isaac. So Isaac is now the head of the family, and he now is in charge, basically. So in verse 20, we read, Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah as his wife, the daughter of Bethuel the Syrian of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban the Syrian, which is what we read about last chapter. Now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his plea, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. So just like Abraham and Sarah, Abraham's son Isaac also and his wife Rebekah also have trouble conceiving and having children. So later on in the chapter, when Rebekah gives birth to her children, it says that Isaac is 60 years old. So that means that for 20 years they were trying to have children and they were not able to. So just to kind of reiterate this point, this is a recurring theme throughout the Bible. A couple who's not able to, a righteous couple who's not able to have children, then miraculously and through the grace and will of God, being able to conceive and have children. And usually those children are special. They're not just random characters in the Bible. They're people of consequence. They're people who are marked for a purpose and who are brought into the world for a purpose by the hand of God Himself. So we've already seen Abraham and Sarah. Their son Isaac becomes the second patriarch of Israel. Later on, we'll read about Jacob and Rachel. Rachel has a very hard time conceiving children. She eventually gives birth to her firstborn son, who's Joseph. Joseph, of course, saves. We'll read about this later on in Genesis, but he saves the whole nation from famine. Hannah is a barren woman who prays and she miraculously conceives. She gives birth to Samuel. Samuel is a prophet of God, and he anoints the first king of Israel. The parents of Samson, the judge, were not able to have children. And then, of course, Samson, who has extreme strength, he's extremely powerful, and he's a judge, and he saves the Israelites from the Philistines. In the New Testament, we read about Zechariah and Elizabeth, who give birth to John the Baptist. And then, last but not least, Joachim and Anna, who, of course, are the parents of the Panagia and give birth to her in old age as well. So it's a theme. It's a recurring theme. And again, in the ancient culture, not being able to have children would have been a big problem. Would have been very difficult for these couples. And the stigma would have been that they were sinful, that they were not righteous. We know, however, that these couples are, and it shows that God works in wondrous ways to bring His will to completion, that these children will be special and blessed by God and will fulfill the work of God in the world as well. So here, once again, we have Isaac and Rebekah not being able to conceive for many years, 20 years, and then by their prayer, which is very important as well. In all these cases, they prayed fervently to be able to have children because every blessing comes from God, and so they knew that God had to be part of the equation as well. So again, and then the children of these prayerful unions and miraculous conceivings are important. People of consequence and special. They're marked by God for His purposes. So let's move forward then, coming from that note. So in verse 22 now, so Rebekah has conceived, and in verse 22 we read the children, plural, struggled together within her. And she said, if all is well, why am I like this? So she went to inquire of the Lord. So she prayed to God, asking basically what was going on. And interestingly, the Lord answers her directly. It says, and the Lord said to her, two nations are in your womb. Two peoples shall be separated from your body. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. So we have in this little communication here between Rebekah and God a foreshadowing of what's going to happen between her two sons. So they're basically jostling around in her womb. They're struggling with each other and giving her some discomfort. And so she prays to God, and God tells her that two children are in your womb, and they're going to struggle with each other, but the older will be the servant of the younger. And this is the foreshadowing that of what is to come. And Rebecca would have been the only person that would have heard this prophecy, and you'll see how that plays into how the rest of the chapter kind of works itself out. So in verse 24, we read, so when her days were fulfilled for her to give birth, indeed there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red. He was like a hairy garment all over. So they called his name Esau. So the first baby comes out, and the baby is hairy and red hair everywhere. And they call his name Esau. Esau means hairy. So, that poor kid growing up, I'm sure all his friends had a field day with that name for him. But the name was a descriptor as well, and it served to describe him, his physical characteristics and features. Afterward, his brother, I'm reading in verse 26 here, afterward his brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel. So the first baby comes out, and immediately coming out of the womb, the second baby now comes out of the womb and grabs Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob. And Jacob is not an insignificant name either. Jacob means he who holds, grasps the heel. He who grasps the heel. So literally, he grasped the heel when he came out of the womb. But that's also a Jewish idiom. And that idiom means like someone who's deceptive, someone who's sneaky. So you have even in their births and in their names, kind of to show what their personalities are going to be like. So Esau is going to be kind of rough and tough. He's going to be an outdoorsman. He's going to be a hunter. He's hairy. He's made for the outdoors. And Jacob is going to be kind of, he's going to be smart. He's going to be sneaky. He's going to be cunning. And so we'll see the struggle that ensues between these two brothers and their relationship with one another. So it's interesting how the names in the Bible are many times very significant. And here we get the note that says that Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah had their children. So that there kind of completes that narrative. Isaac is 40 years old when they get married, and he's 60 years old when she finally gives birth. So it took him 20 years. So the boys grew, and Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field. But Jacob was a mild man, dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So we have kind of some favoritism here among the family. So dad loves Esau, mom loves Jacob. And we'll see that plays an important note in the next chapter as well. In verse 29, we see kind of where the difference in personalities now starts to impact the relationship and also the future of the family. So in verse 29, we read, now Jacob cooked a stew. So he's cooking. He's in his tent and he's cooking a stew. And Esau came in from the field, and he was weary. So Esau comes back probably from hunting or doing some kind of work, and he's starving. He's really hungry, and he's tired. And Esau said to Jacob, please feed me with that same red stew, for I am weary. And there's a play on words there with, or a connection there drawn between Esau, who has red hair, to also the red stew of that Jacob is cooking as well, kind of like an attraction there between Esau and the food. For I am weary. But Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright as of this day." So Jacob says, "Okay, you want my food that I'm making? Sell me your birthright." So what exactly does that mean? So the birthright was an extremely important concept in the ancient world. The basic idea is that the firstborn son was the son who had the birthright. And what that means is that the firstborn son, the birthright gets, the child who has the birthright gets a bigger portion of the inheritance. He also carries on kind of the family name and the legacy. He inherits the hierarchy, the status, and the authority over the family of the father. So when Abraham died, that authority and status in the family passed on to his son Isaac, who was his first legitimate, his first legitimate son of his wife. So Isaac received the birthright from Abraham. Now Isaac's sons are born. Esau is the first one to come out. He's the son of the birthright. So as they get older, when Isaac dies, it will be Esau who becomes the next leader of the family, who will have the authority and the status and the hierarchy among the people. And at that time too, the leader of the family had influence over the whole family, not just his own children and grandchildren, cousins, his siblings. Even as they were in their adulthood, the patriarch of the family would have had authority over them. So it was a hugely important position and a hugely important title. The son of the birthright really is the legacy of the family. The legacy of the family will be placed in this one son's hands to be the leader of the family going forward. So this son is Esau. And now Esau, the birthright son, comes back from the field and he's dying of hunger. And he goes to his brother Jacob, "Hey, give me some food." And he says, "Okay, I'll give you the food, but sell me your birthright." So in other words, let's make a trade. I'll give you the stew, you give me your birthright. Now it doesn't seem like an even trade, but in verse 32, we hear Esau say, "Look, I'm about to die. So what is this birthright to me?" Then Jacob said, "Swear to me as of this day." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob gave Esau bread and stew of lentils. Then he ate and drank, arose, and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. So shockingly, Esau sells his birthright to Isaac for a bowl of stew. And St. John Chrysostom points to this as a sign of Esau's kind of low moral character. That he has no regard for his inheritance, and so he rightly loses it by selling it for the stew. It's also kind of like the first instance of the instant gratification, right? Esau's hungry. The only thing he can think about is that he wants food and he wants it right now, and he'll do whatever it takes to get it. He seeks that instant gratification, and in doing so, he loses the way more important things that are going to come down the road. Now, how big of a difference would it have been? So, for example, in terms of the inheritance, if there were two sons in ancient Israel, the older son of the birthright would have gotten 2/3 of it, and the younger son would have gotten 1/3. So he literally would have gotten double the inheritance that Jacob would have gotten. If there's more than two siblings, the older sibling gets half of the inheritance, and the other siblings split it evenly. So, for example, if there's 10 sons, right, the oldest gets half, and the other ones each get 1/9 of the rest of it. So it's a big difference. He sells his birthright for a bowl of stew, and he gives up a ton of benefits, so to speak. So it's kind of shocking. And just to continue on this idea of the birthright too, the firstborn son would have been the son of the birthright. This is a title that we also hear in the New Testament with Jesus, right? First of all, Jesus is the Word of God, the only begotten Son of the Father. And so we have that connection of the only begotten Son of God, who kind of in has the same authority as God the Father, right? Like there's implications there in that phrasage, that the Son is equal to the Father, right? If he's the firstborn son, then he has equal authority and status as the Father does. So that's hugely important in terms of our theology and our understanding of the Trinity. In his humanity, he's also the firstborn son of Mary, meaning that if in the family of Mary, he has a special position, a special authority within the family circle. Now, many people, not Orthodox theologians or Bible scholars, but many times in the Protestant churches, they read this, that Jesus was the firstborn son of Mary, and the implication for them is that Mary had more children, that Jesus was not the only son of Mary, that she went on and had more children throughout her life. For us, that's not part of our theological tradition at all. And quite frankly, for us, it's unacceptable. Now, it's interesting to note that even the word firstborn is actually not simply to describe where someone falls in the line. It's an actual title. It's an actual title that would have had like legal implications. So, for example, in the ancient archaeological digs of funeral sites, they have found inscriptions, for example, that have said, this woman, here lies this woman, whatever, something like that, who died in childbirth, giving birth to her firstborn son. Well, if the son, and that's important because if she's dying in childbirth to her only child, then obviously it's the firstborn child, right? It could have said her only child. But the term firstborn is still there, it's still used even though there's no later children, right? If firstborn was only used to imply that there were more children after, then that phrase doesn't make any sense. It's overkill. Because if there's more children, there can't be more children because she died in giving birth to the firstborn. So it goes to show that even the name the firstborn, when it's used in the New Testament as well, is not a sign that there's more children after Jesus with Mary. It's really just that he is the firstborn son, and that has not only legal in terms of the inheritance implications, but within their family that he's going to be an authority figure among the children of Mary, even though we know, according to our tradition, she never had any more children. Other people will also point to the fact that there's passages in the Bible that talk about Jesus' brothers, brothers and sisters. First of all, we'll see in just a few chapters that people within a family, even an extended family, were many times called brothers or sisters. So when we hear in the New Testament Jesus's brothers and sisters, talking about brothers and sisters, it doesn't mean they were born of Mary. Also, in our tradition, we understand that Joseph was a widower and he had a family beforehand. So according to his earthly family, Jesus would have had half siblings. Of course, Joseph is not his biological father. Christ doesn't have a biological father, but he would have had, in terms of the family line, he would have been the betrothed of Mary. He already had sons. They would have been his half siblings, so to speak, right? So when you hear that in that passage in the New Testament too, understand that it doesn't mean that Jesus has more siblings by Mary, or that Mary has more children after Jesus. According to our tradition and theological tradition, which is 2,000 years old, Mary doesn't have any more children. What does she need children for? She gave birth to the Son of God. She can't outdo that. So lots of interesting connections to be made there. So in the end, Esau sells his birthright for a bowl of stew. It's interesting here to note too that in the ancient culture, older siblings would have always had priority and dominance over their younger siblings. Like I said, even in adulthood, the patriarch of the family would have had authority over even his siblings who would have also been adults to tell them what to do. But in the Bible, it's not always the case. There are many instances where a younger sibling kind of ascends to dominance over the older sibling, and especially when it comes to receiving God's blessings. So we already saw Isaac getting the blessings of God over Ishmael, even though Ishmael was older. and Abraham's son. Isaac is the son of the promise and of the blessing. Now we have Jacob and Esau. Jacob has now secured the birthright somehow using his delicious cooking powers. We had Cain and Abel. Cain was the older son of Adam and Eve, but it was Abel's offerings to God that were acceptable. Later on in the New Old Testament, we'll see David. David is the youngest, not the youngest, but one of the younger siblings of, I think, 8 brothers, and he ascends to the throne. And then later in this book, we'll read about Joseph, who was one of the youngest of 12 brothers, and yet he's the one that saves the whole tribe, the whole nation. What it shows here is that what's important in the eyes of God is not necessarily rank or societal, expectations, but behavior, attitude towards God and virtue. So we have in the Bible like we have had many times, the ordinary human values and expectations kind of being turned over here in this situation. So now let's see kind of how this story really plays out. Oops, sorry. In chapter 26, there's a famine. Isaac goes down to Egypt he goes down to the land of the Philistines according to God's command. Once again, we see this continues to happen in the family. Isaac has to pass his wife Rebekah off as his sister, and in order to not be killed. And you have to wonder, like, how does this keep happening to this family, right? Like, they keep coming into new lands and having to pretend that they're siblings instead of husband and wife. But in the end of the day, the trick works, right? Like, at the end of the day, it's worked. They're 3 for 3 now because Isaac and Rebekah are able to leave peacefully. And actually, Isaac prospers there. They kind of like tell him to go away because he's so prosperous in that land. They're beginning to fear him and that he'll come after them and attack them. They make an agreement with him in Beersheba that there will be peace between them, that he won't bother them, basically. So that's chapter 26. I don't feel like we really need to get too deep into it. Chapter 27 is really where things get interesting again. Now, at the end of chapter 26 and verse 34, we get a note here. When Esau was 40 years old, he took as wives Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. Now, the Hittites are not part of the family, so that's a no-no. It's not good. And it says in verse 35, they were a grief of mind to Isaac and Rebekah. So now Esau's parents are not happy with him. And in chapter 11, this will be the last chapter we cover tonight, we'll see that it kind of comes to a head here. So in chapter 27, just to set the scene, Isaac is now an old man, he's blind, and he's getting close to his death. And so in verse 1, he calls to his son Esau and says, "My son." And Esau answers him, "Here I am." Then he said, "Behold, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now, therefore, please take your weapons, your quiver, and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game, and make me savory food, such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die." So now this would have been a custom. This would have been a custom in the ancient times, and even really in our modern days, where as someone is getting ready to die, they gather the children together and they pronounce blessings on them. Among the Greek culture, you may hear older family members say, "Nachstinevhimu," may you have my blessing. So it's kind of a remnant of that tradition on the deathbed, really, where they would gather the family together. So this is what Isaac is doing. He realizes that his death is coming, and he brings his firstborn son, the son of the birthright, before he sold it for a pot of stew. He brings him in and says, "Do this for me, make me some savory food that, I can give you my blessing." So he's just kind of trying to carry on this tradition, and especially the blessing on the firstborn son. This is kind of would have been where the mantle would have been passed on. The torch would have been passed now from Isaac to Esau, giving him the authority, giving him the leadership among the family to give that final blessing to his firstborn son, the son of the birthright, would have been that like momentous occasion where now then there's a new leader in the house. So this is important here. And Rebekah, the mother, realizes what's happening and she decides to take action. So in verse 5 we read, son. And Esau went to the field to hunt game and bring it. So Esau leaves to go get the food. And Rebekah spoke to Jacob her son, saying, indeed, I heard your father speak to Esau your brother, saying, bring me game and make savory food for me, that I may eat it and bless you in the presence of the Lord before my death. Now, therefore, my son, so here's the plan, right? Here's the sneaky plan of Rebekah. Now, therefore, my son, obey my voice according to what I command you. Go now to the flock and bring me from there 2 choice kids of the goats, and I will make savory food from them for your father, such as he loves. Then you shall take it to your father, that he may eat it, and he may bless you before his death. So remember, Isaac is blind. He can't see what's going on. So Rebekah says, go out to the field. So we have 10,000 sheep out there. Go pick 2 of the goats, the young ones that are good for eating, and bring them here, and I'll make them for your father. I know how he likes the food. And you'll bring it to him, and you'll get the blessing instead of Esau, because he's going to be out hunting for God knows how long. So she puts this plan into action to deceive Isaac and get the blessing for Jacob. Because remember, when they were in the womb struggling together, what did God tell her? The older shall serve the younger. So now she's remembers this, and she's makes this plan to make it happen. Now Jacob said to Rebekah his mother, look, Esau my brother is a hairy man, and I am a smooth-skinned man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be a deceiver to him, and I shall bring a curse on myself and not a blessing. But his mother said to him, let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice and go get them for me. And he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and his mother made savory food such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the choice clothes of her elder son Esau, which were with her in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son. So not only does she make food for Isaac on Jacob's behalf, she also clothes him in Esau's clothes, so that he'll smell like Esau. And in verse 16, she put the skins of the kids of the goats on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. So she takes the fur, she takes the wool from the goats, she puts it on Isaac's skin, so that Jacob's skin, so that if Isaac is going to touch him, he'll feel the wool, and he'll think that it's Esau's hair, because remember, he's very hairy. Then she gave the savory food and the bread which she had prepared into the hand of her son Jacob. So now the plan is being executed. So he went to his father and said, my father. And he said, here I am. Who are you, my son? Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done just as you told me. Please rise, sit, and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me. But Isaac said to his son, how is it that you have found it so quickly, my son? And he said, because the Lord your God brought it to me. Isaac said to Jacob, please come near, that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esau or not. So Isaac, to his credit, is a little hesitant here, probably from his voice. Jacob's voice is probably different than Esau's. So he's a little hesitant. He's not completely sold that it's Esau. Also, that happened much faster than he was anticipating. So Jacob went near to Isaac, his father, and he felt him and said, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And he did not recognize him, because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him. Then he said, are you really my son Esau? He said, I am. He said, bring it near to me, and I will eat of my son's game, so that my soul may bless you. So he brought it near to him, and he ate, and he brought him wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, come near now, and kiss me, my son. And he came near and kissed him. And he smelled the smell of his clothing, and blessed him, and said. So the deception is complete at this point. Isaac has enjoyed the food. He has smelled Esau's clothes. He's touched his hairy skin. And he's sold now that this is Esau, and he gives the blessing. This is the blessing. Surely the smell of my son is like the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. Therefore may God give you of the dew of heaven, of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be master over your brethren, and let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be those who bless you. So Jacob steals the blessing. And remember, his name means deceive, one who deceives. So it all comes now to fruition. And he gets the blessings that he'll have the fatness of the earth, plenty of grain and wine, and that his mother's sons, meaning Esau, because he's the only other one, will serve him. In the next part of the chapter, Esau comes home, and he brings the game that he has made and the food that he's made to his father. And he says, hey, Dad, come and eat the food that I made for you and bless me. And Isaac says, who are you? And then Esau says, I'm your son, your firstborn. Remember that title, Esau. So Isaac freaks out. He starts trembling and says, who's the one who hunted game and brought it to me already? I ate all of it before you came, and I have blessed him, and indeed he shall be blessed. So in other words, the blessing that was given to Jacob will not be taken away. That blessing sticks. When Esau heard the word of his father, we're in verse 34 now, he cried with an exceedingly great and bitter cry and said to his father, bless me also, my father. But he said, your brother came with deceit and has taken away your blessing. So he begs that he can get one blessing. He says, please, in verse 38, have you only one blessing, my father? Bless me also. And the blessing he gets is he gets a blessing, but it's not what he should have gotten. Isaac says, behold, your dwelling shall be of the fatness of the earth and of the dew of heaven from above. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. And it shall come to pass, when you become restless, that you shall break his yoke from your neck. And so Esau is devastated, and he hates Jacob. He hated Jacob, it says here. And he says that when my father dies and the days of my mourning are come, then I will get my revenge and I will kill him. And this goes to show too, kind of the character once again of Esau. He's proven again and again that his character is not really of a high standard. He's married to Canaanite women. He sold his birthright for a bowl of stew. Now he's ready to kill his brother. So really, Jacob, even though he's not perfect and he's deceiving his brother Esau, he's a better candidate to carry on the family legacy, right? He's a better choice. He's more virtuous than Esau is. And St. John Chrysostom says pretty much the same thing. He says it's appropriate that God's will was carried out in this way, that Esau was not a suitable choice, and so it was appropriate that the blessing would not be conferred on him. It wasn't God's will that Israel's line should go through Esau, but rather that it should go through Jacob. And so we have, at the end of this chapter, Rebekah sneaking her son Jacob out of town because Esau is ready to kill him. So she sends him to her brother Laban, who we already met earlier. And next week we'll see what happens to Jacob when he leaves his house and goes to Laban's house. All right. Now we covered a lot of ground there. So if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and fire away. Otherwise, we'll break for the night. Going once, going twice. All right, thank you all. God bless you. Be well. And on Thursday, we will continue also with Faith 101. And we're drawing near to the conclusion of that. I think we have 2 more sessions on the Divine Liturgy. And then hopefully we'll be able to continue with Genesis, barring any other interruptions to our schedule like we've had for the last week or 2. So thank you all for your patience and your attentiveness, and God bless and have a very good night. Thank you once again.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.